Very well, welcome back. This is Business Defined, not Business Defined, but Business Insight. Tonight, I told you we want to focus on the Kenyan economy as we come to the end of the year 2018. Maurice Odour is a principal officer at Cytonn. Principal officer, what do you do, actually?
I'm in charge of running the Cytonn Asset Managers, which is the regulated affiliate of Cytonn Investments.
Oh, yes. Very well. Good. Tell me this. First of all, I want to hear your views on the rollout of the universal healthcare coverage by the government. Do you think this project will work?
I think if we want it to work, it will work. Because if you look at Kenya, we have a lot of resources, and the issue remains still our priority as a nation in terms of how do we channel our resources, different aspects of the country that we want to ensure that at least Kenyans benefit. If you look at even the kind of wastage that we see in terms of corruption cases, scandal that we hear about, they are to a higher level. If we control that and channel this money toward the provision of some of these essential services, I am sure it will work.
Tell me this, have we invested adequately when it comes to the enabling infrastructure? And I'm talking about doctors or health personnel, equipment, and so much.
We are not at the level that we are supposed to be, but at least we are somewhere. Which now the thing that now remains now, how do we improve on our capacity to ensure that at least we are able to offer those services, quality health services to Kenyans, which if you look at the resources that we have, in terms of opening up of the infrastructure, in fact that is required, opening up of more medical training colleges, if we control and we set our priorities right as a country, we'll be able to achieve universal health care. It will take us time, it needs a lot of work, it needs a lot of sacrifices, it needs a proper planning, but if we devote our time as a country, we can achieve it.
We can achieve it.
Yes.
Very well. Let's come now to manufacturing. Do you feel that the government has walked the talk when it comes to investment and policy changes within the manufacturing sector in Kenya here, with the target of increasing this to around 20% of GDP in less than 4 years from now?
I think if you look at where we are as a country in terms of even sectoral contribution to GDP, manufacturing currently stands between 8 and 9%. We want to move that from 8 to 9% to 20%, between 15 and 20%, which again will require a lot of work to be done because where we are as a country, credit flow is still stifled. The sector is not getting as adequate, as sufficient capital that they require. Where we are as a country, look at even in terms of our cost of production, it still remains very expensive. Look at some of the imported goods arrives in Kenya, they still remain cheaper than compared to locally produced goods. Look at companies, our different sectors, like if you look at companies like Mumia Sugar Company, is almost like dying off, mainly because of the importation of sugar. So we need to look at all these things put together. We need to come up with ways of ensuring that the cost of production is relatively lower, credit flow is improving, so that at least we be able to move this sector to the next level. Because look at manufacturing, it also supports agriculture because we need most of agro-based industry to provide opportunity for conversion of these raw materials to sort of like processed or finished goods to continue supporting agriculture. Look at manufacturing, again, is supposed to be one of the key employers in the country. It's supposed even to be just second to agriculture. All these things, if we need to ensure that there's credit flow, cost of production remains adequate for our goods to be also competitive compared to imported goods, but at the same time, the government need to take a decisive action even to move to a level of protecting the local industries.
Very good. When you look at the growth of the manufacturing sector in the second quarter of this year, it grew by around 3.1%. We saw some contraction in the year 2017 for a similar period. What do we need to do to accelerate growth?
We need to ensure that if you look at from 2016, when we enacted the amendment of the Banking Act 2015, that now placed a cap in terms of how we are supposed to price loans. Banks nowadays, they only invest in treasury bills. We now, in terms of risk pricing, they prefer giving money to the government, which now means private sector is suffering in terms of the capital they require to continue running their operation. We need to ensure that at least the access to financing still remains there for the manufacturing sector to continue running their operation. If you look at in some other countries, they usually have like what we call specialized financial institutions that are known that this financial institutions usually support this specific sector. We need to come up with such aspects. And also we need to look at how Kenya used to operate before, because when I talk about manufacturing sector, I usually remember companies like Kikomi, Kisumu, Cotton Mill, companies like Rivertex, which nowadays a department within the Moi University. We need to ensure that at least these agro-based companies are back so that they continue also supporting agriculture.
Look at, we've been talking about, creating special economic zones as well as industrial parks. And, there was a plan to set up an industrial park in Naivasha, whereby investors were to access cheaper power. This is yet to happen. Why do we take so long, to actualize our programs?
If you look at the challenge that we face as a country, it comes in the planning and prioritizing that what do we want to achieve and at what price. Sometimes I have a feeling we usually go full-blown on other things that we even know we need them, but it's not a priority. So the government needs to sit down and come up with a planning of what do we need to come first and how now do we move to funding it. Because if you look at most of the projects like SGR, we needed SGR, yes, but it was not that urgent, not even at that price. So we need to ensure that at least we come up with the segments of the economy that we want to give priority, we focus on that, we channel resources toward that, to achieve that, and even that will have some knock-off effects in terms of affecting other sectors. So the key thing remains planning and setting our priorities right.
Planning and setting our priorities. Tell me things, in 2018, we saw the level of Kenya's debt, rise to its highest levels in history, at about 5.2 trillion Kenya shillings, which is almost 52% of our GDP. Tell me this, what do you feel and what do you make of this?
I think if you look at the debt level, even locally, the government has borrowed a lot in terms of local debt borrowing. And now we are seeing appetite now increasing in terms of the foreign debt. And if you look at how we supposed to look at foreign debt compared to domestic debt, it's supposed to be totally different. Because now foreign debt, we are going to get loans in terms of other currency, which again now opens up the Kenyan economy in terms of shocks in the global economy directly affect the country. But if you look at what we're supposed to do, not really look at our public financial management aspects to ensure that at least in terms of physical and in terms of current and development expenditure, we put more money in terms of funding the development project as opposed to allocating more money to fiscal expenditure, to recurrent expenditure. Then the government also needs to run a lean and an efficient government so that we allocate more resources to finance development activities. We need also to come to a situation where now we look at our governance structure, whether is it working or is it too expensive for Kenya. Because remember, currently, 47 counties, central government, those are 47, the central government or some other autonomous 47 government that you are running. You look at now two levels of the legislative houses, the National Assembly and the Senate. We need to put all these things together and ask ourselves a question that, is this the mode of government that we want to run and can we afford it? Because it's all these that actually create pressure now in terms of raising revenue for the government that now pushes it towards borrowing and increasing the debt level. Then the next thing we need to ensure that as a country we create an enabling environment for private sector to operate, grow the economy, make profit, and in turn pay taxes for the government to fund the activities.
And tell me this, we all know the famous handshake, between President Uhuru Kenyatta and opposition leader Raila Odinga sometimes in March. Has this translated into good tides for this country? Because when you look at, for example, the tourism industry, which you would expect to show immediate signs of recovery, you realize that growth was almost muted, to the same period last year at about 5%.
Yeah. If you look at from the political landscape, the handshake between President Uhuru Kenyatta and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga to me, it helped the economy in terms of stabilizing and now diverting attention more from political aspect, look at other now segments of the economy. Imagine where we were in terms of the run-up to the presidential election in 2017. If we could have kept that pace up to now, we'll be talking of other different things. So political stability that is there has helped us. Now it's upon Kenyans, guided by our leader, to ensure at least we take the advantage of the current political stability in the country. Yeah.
Well, let's look at, going forward. Do you see, this continued? And we saw politicians, of course, in Kisumu County, whereby they proclaimed that the handshake is there to stay. What would you expect, going forward out of the handshake?
What I expect going forward, at least the stability is going to be there in terms of almost all Kenyans feeling that we are part, this is our government and we are part, all of us are Kenyans together. Because if you look at even in terms of how the government is being in terms of recognition, all the corners of Kenya now almost like recognized. It's difficult to tell who is in government, who is in opposition, which is good for unity purposes and also to ensuring at least development trickles to all different parts of the country. But if you look at in the run-up to 2022, that's now where the danger will come in, because we've seen it happening in Kenya before. We've seen it again now. Where we are headed, we can even sort of like predict. But at least now, the main thing that remains is how now we'll move to that next general election, which will determine how we'll carry out the election. And also, remember, in the last election, the most question was about the capacity and the independence of Electoral and Boundaries Commission to carry out the election, to oversee the election, which again will come in as another factor. So the question still remains in the run-up to the 2022 election. We may see some political instability coming because we've seen it in the past. We saw it after 2007, we saw it in 2002, we saw it in 2013, we saw it again in 2017. Okay. So we'll again see it in 2022. Yeah.
Tell me things, when you look at the Nairobi Securities Exchange, it has been a poor performer in the last 3 years or so. In the second quarter of this year, it contracted by about 9%, and it's now at around 3,200 points. Do you see the market, returning to the bull arena?
If you look at the Nairobi Securities Exchange, the challenge comes because if you look at the best quarter was quarter 2, where the market did almost 15% in terms of return. But if you look at now what happened in quarter 2 and now what we saw happening in in fact, not quarter 2, part of quarter 1, because the highest level was in February this year. If you look at what happened now during quarter 1 and now the changes we saw coming quarter 2 and quarter 3, quarter 1, most of emerging market economies were experiencing different problems. No. If you look at South Africa, has had its own issues with the rand. If you look at most countries like Brazil, they had their own issues that they were struggling with, the debt and all those other aspects. Now, Nigeria, they had all this with Naira currency devaluation. Look at Ghana, they were facing also high non-performing loans, mainly from support from the oil, effect of the oil, the low oil prices. Now the focus for foreign investors attention was into Kenya, because now Kenya was sort of like stable to them, and they could now move out of those markets, focus in Kenya. The high demand for shares, which now led to increase in the share price, translating to better performance of the indices. Coming to quarter 2, now there was stability in those other sectors, because those other countries, Naira stabilized in South Africa, Nigeria again, rand stable in South Africa, Naira again sort of like stabilized in Nigeria. It logo to Ghana, the country, the government made to support the sector in terms of non-performing loans. Now when attention was shifting to Kenya, and again, it was complicated by the IMF, the expiry of standby facility, which foreign investors actually attach high significant weight to. That now we saw the performance coming down. But if you look at the key sectors in the security exchange, like the financial services sector, mainly banks, they are very cheap. And it now provides a good entry point for investors who are looking at long-term gain. They are value to be extracted from the security exchange even currently. Very good.
Because we have to wind up, I two things I want to hear from you. Going into next year, what are your expectations, and what do we need to do, in order for us to accelerate economic growth?
I think what we need to do to accelerate economic growth, because one, we need to ensure that there's a conducive operating environment for even foreign investors to come in. One of the things we need to do to ensure that at least that what is happening is providing environment, improving the metrics that determine the ease of doing business. Another thing that we need to ensure that we work with in terms of the credit flow to support different segments of the economy that will in turn boost economic growth. Then the next thing that we need to work, ensure that continue being there, the political stability to provide the environment for all these other aspects to operate. If we do all those, we'll see all these things now filtering into the GDP growth. Currently, we expect GDP to grow at about 5.5% for the year 2018, which if we maintain that, we may even see GDP growing faster than 5.5% in the year 2019. Yeah.
Very well. Maurice, thank you so very much indeed for your insight.
Thank you.
Very good. Maurice Odour is a Principal Officer at Cytonn, joining us here to help us make sense of our economic performance in 2018.